President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially declared a national state of disaster in response to the energy crisis in the country. The president will also appoint a minister of electricity in the presidency who will apparently focus on overseeing all aspects of the electricity crisis response. This comes at a time when the country is grappling with load shedding on a daily basis. Let's get you a sense of what to make of these two major announcements. Bringing our guest, Dr. Roland Ngam, is a product manager for climate justice. Also joining us there is Professor Dewald from Niekerk from the University of the Northwest. To both our guests, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for making time to speak to us. I wonder, Dr. Ngam, if I can begin with you. A lot of people from last night into this morning are scratching their heads around whether or not as a start we even needed a national state of disaster in response to the energy crisis. So perhaps let me pose the question this way. What does this declaration allow the government to do now, which they couldn't do, for instance, through the Public Finance Management Act?
Yes, good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to all the viewers. I think we really need to understand what happened yesterday. The first thing is that the minister of the presidency is being appointed to manage the country's electricity issues. What the president really did was appoint a project manager. Remember, he says yesterday that there will be a kind of comprehensive overhaul of South Africa's electricity system. And so you have new build capacity coming on. You've got rooftop solar that is going to be rolled out at record pace. You also have the fixes that are happening at Kusile, for example, Kubek, and so on. These are things really that will be difficult for an energy minister or Pravin Gordhan to manage. The second thing that he does really is try and reassure South Africans by announcing this act. And what this does is, once again, it is important to understand this. It shows that if you walk into a bank, for example, you do not stand in the queue. You go straight to the front. If there is red tape, that will be eliminated quickly. If there are challenges with finding money, that will be availed very quickly. And so that is what the two announcements do to resolve the electricity challenge.
Professor van Niekerk, do you buy that? I mean, it's taken us more than a decade to finally fix this energy crisis. What makes us think that we're going to get to it now because of the state of disaster that's been declared?
Morning, Ayanda. Yes, and I've been quite vocal in the past week in saying that this is not the right mechanism to use. The government has gone forward and they've now implemented a national state of disaster, as we know. All of the things that the president mentioned last night, and I went through the whole list with the exception of one, which I will come back to later. We have adequate state mechanism to address these things. I do understand that when it comes to emergency powers, there is a fast track to procurement, but we also felt that sting when it came to COVID-19. So there's a lot of skepticism by many parties, including civil society, questioning the rationale behind and the motivation behind using the state of disaster. What we will see from this point onward, and it's all that to all South Africans, is a set of regulations that's going to come out. And those regulations will govern to what extent this state of disaster will address the emergency crisis. So I'm quite curious to see how these regulations will differ from what the president has been saying in the past 6 months and what government has been trying to do for the past X decades. And that, I think, is the discerning factor between whether we actually will have benefit out of this state of disaster or not.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for instance, there are people who are looking at this and saying this is not the game changer that the president is trying to paint it as. It's more of a political gimmick, coming across as you're doing something significant when, quite frankly, all you're doing is putting up a smokescreen. But Dr. Ngam, as I get your take on that, there's also real questions around where this Minister of Electricity falls into the kind of response, as it were. Because, as you mentioned, we've got Pravin Gordhan, who's in charge of the department that's in charge of Eskom, essentially. We've got Minister Kwede Mantashe, who's in charge of policy that might direct how Eskom operates. And then we've got the CEO of Eskom, who's meant to be in charge of the SOE, broadly speaking. In that context, it feels like there's an overlap of mandates, and it becomes difficult to hold specific people accountable in that context, some people argue.
Well, I think we once again need to see this in the context of a number of things. Maybe, yes, you are right that I under that there could be some politicking involved in this. But at the same time, the other aspect, obviously, I'm just looking at this from a very neutral point of view, that this is really trying to appoint a project manager who is going to pull everything together. There are certain things that usually happen, and it is very difficult to get in front of a microphone and explain to everybody what's happening. And I think that this project manager really is appointed for that purpose. When there are breakdowns, trying to bring on the new build capacity, ensuring that the fixes at Kusile are happening at the pace they're supposed to happen in. Announcing the rooftop deals and so on. You will need a project manager, a hands-on person who is going to be on these issues 24/7. And I suppose that it is very difficult for someone who is dealing, for example, with SAA and other things to be focused on this full-time as well. And also, we need to understand as well that the president is trying to ensure that the promises of solving the electricity crisis within 12 to 18 months is kept.
Let me ask the question this way, Dr. Ngam, if I can stay with you. How do you envision this Minister of Electricity interacting with the CEO of Eskom? Because a lot of what you've just said around managing extra capacity build, ensuring that there is a full report around the breakdown of generation units, that all sounds to me like the stuff that the CEO of Eskom should be doing anyway.
Yes, and also if you heard Gwede Mantashe at the mining in Durban, also yesterday post Sona, what he was saying was essentially that Eskom seems to be talking about resolving its challenges over maybe 4 to 5 years, and the government is saying that we need to do this within 18 months at the very latest, and so he needs somebody that he can trust, who is going to be standing over Eskom's shoulder, as it were, trying to analyze everything that they do and cutting down the times that they're supposed to be doing things at. At the same time as well, remember that new laws are going to be enacted very soon, like the president said yesterday, to fundamentally transform the electricity sector. And so all these things really mean that he wants somebody right next to him that he can trust. And hopefully this is not going to be a political appointment. It should be someone who is steeped in the engineering know-how and who really can help deliver the kind of things that he wants very short term.
Yeah. Professor Niekerk, we're dealing now with a situation where there's a National Energy Crisis Committee, there's an Energy Action Plan. Now there's a Minister of Electricity who's going to work with all the other ministers, we're told. But I wonder to what extent you reckon yesterday's speech really got down to helping us understand how we're going to fix the bottom line, which is all around this energy availability factor. Insofar as you're concerned, is this the strategy to get us there?
Yeah, and I think there's more questions to be asked than answers given. Like I said, nothing that the president said is new. None of the proposals that he made is anything significant that we're not aware of. I think it's just extremely alarming that we have to go down the route of using a national state of disaster to be fixing these issues and make appointments of a minister, which we call a project manager, in the president's office to manage it. All of this does not make a lot of sense, does it? And I think if it comes to the period of the state of disaster, there's another thing that we need to be considering. If the president, first of all, they said this will be until the end of the year. So they're preempting a state of disaster. Now we're talking about 18 months, maybe 2 years. How long will we find ourselves in the state of disaster to be doing what the government should just be doing in the first place? I mean, there's quite a lot of questions that we need to ask, and I think there's a huge amount of litigation we're going to see coming from political parties and from civil society as well. And I stand on my point. Nothing that government can do normally, they can do otherwise under the state of disaster except procurement. Now, there's one element that I would like to highlight, and that is one thing that the president mentioned, and it was just kind of in passing. And he said that this would enable them to procure emergency power within the next 6 months. And he kind of went on and he talked about the state of disaster, if I remember correctly. So what is he actually saying with that? Is the state of disaster just there so that they can bypass regulations, environmental impact assessments to get car power on board? Does it have some kind of hidden political agenda to get cutbacks into the ANC for elections for next year? You see, when you use a state of disaster to centralize power in this way, there's all kinds of conspiracies that come to mind. And unfortunately, nothing that the ANC has done, lessens this or mitigates this situation. These are unfortunately the questions that the population of South Africa is going to ask.
Yeah. In fact, I've got that part of the speech in my hand now. He said yesterday that the state of disaster will enable us to accelerate energy projects and limit regulatory requirements while maintaining rigorous environmental projections, procurement principles, and technical standards. At some stage, we need to speak about what that means.
And what is that different than what the government is doing?
Precisely. Dr. Ngam, there's also questions around what happens on the other side of this crisis to this particular minister. I wonder whether in your mind, and to be fair, government hasn't been clear about this, but in your mind, what happens to that minister in the event that we do solve this crisis? Because I imagine that, of course, is the objective.
Well, I suppose that the idea generally... as is the custom around the world, sometimes you appoint a guru to deal with a specific problem, and when that problem is resolved, that position falls away. Very short term, if you transform the energy sector, this person really then shouldn't really keep in his portfolio. That could be made a junior minister in the public enterprises department, for example.
All right. Well, thanks for your take, gentlemen, as we continue making sense in the early hours of this morning of what the way forward looks like. Dr. Ronald Ngam is with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Also joining us there is Professor Dewald with the Northwest University. Once again, to both our guests, thanks very much for your take.